Most of week one's in the books. The Giants versus Cowboys game is on right now, and we still have the Bills versus the Jets. But today had some action, and I want to talk about the studs and duds. Those of you who are new here, a stud is somebody who shows out. They had a fantastic game. A dud, on the other hand, is someone who dramatically underperformed what you were expecting. Now that we got that cleared up, I gotta start with the stud of the day. Tyreek Hill, he went absolutely nuts this week. In the most exciting game of the week, Dolphins versus Chargers, Tyreek Hill put up an incredible stat line. 15 targets, 11 receptions, 215 yards, and 2 touchdowns with a long of 47. Tyreek Hill went absolutely bonkers today. He scored 39 points in fantasy football. And if you play in a league that gives you bonuses for long receptions, he might have scored you 50. Tyreek Hill showed out. He said he wanted to get 2,000 yards this year. He might actually do it. The current wide receiver 2, Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk showed out this week. 28.9 fantasy points. He caught all 8 of his targets for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's really good for somebody you got in the middle rounds. Brandon Ayuk won some of you games this week and made some of y'all real sad. I've seen a lot of people that bench Brandon Ayuk. Yeesh. Not a good start to the week. Hopefully the rest of your team did well. At wide receiver 3, we have Jacoby Myers. 24.6 fantasy points this week. Who's so new to the team that I haven't even updated a graphic yet. But he balled out. 10 targets, 9 receptions, 81 yards, and 2 touchdowns. My man came to the Raiders and said, Devontae who? That's obviously a joke. Devontae Adams is a dog. We have Kendrick Bourne. I really gotta update these graphics. 11 targets, 6 receptions, 64 yards, but 2 touchdowns will put you on this list. 21.4 fantasy points this week. In 5th, we have Calvin Ridley, scoring 20.1 points. He had 11 targets, 8 receptions, 101 yards, and a touchdown. If there were any questions about whether or not he was back, those were answered. He's back. So that's it for the top 5, but I would like to give an honorable mention to Michael Pittman, who played a lot better than I thought he would. 19.7 fantasy points. And Justin Jefferson, who had 19.5 fantasy points. Both of them showed out. They just weren't in the top 5. Next up, wide receiver duds. And these are just players we were expecting to do well. I'm going to exclude Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney. They're garbage. We probably shouldn't have been starting them anyways, but they were flyers. Let's talk about the real people that everybody should have been starting. Bust number 1, DJ Moore. I was never super high on DJ Moore, but he was still drafted in like the 20s for wide receiver. Yikes. 2 targets, 2 receptions for 25 yards. I mean, y'all were down like the whole game. Y'all been trying to get him the ball. What were y'all doing? DJ Moore had 5 points. Bust number 2, Terry McLaurin. He was awful. This one I saw coming though. I did tell y'all to sit him, to be fair. My man had turf toe. We didn't expect him to show out. But let's look at his stats anyways, because some of y'all actually started him. 4 targets, 2 receptions for 31 yards. 5 fantasy points. Not getting it done. Number 3, Amari Cooper. He did not play well. In a game that they won, 4-3. I know that there was inclement weather, so I'm assuming that played a pretty solid factor in that. But still, Amari Cooper had 7 targets, 3 receptions for 37 yards and no touchdowns, giving him 7 fantasy points. That's not really good. I would say Deontay Johnson, but he got hurt. That doesn't really count. And the last 3 I'll group together because they all scored the same amount of fantasy points. 9. It's not crushing your team, but where you drafted this last one, it might have been real disappointing. So we have Mike Williams in a high-flying affair that didn't really do anything. 9 fantasy points, meh. Then we have Marquise Brown, but he had a hamstring situation. I told y'all not to start him anyways. But this last one hurt, y'all. Oof. I don't have any of them because where y'all were drafting him, I was drafting Tyreek Hill. And some of y'all's fantasy MVPs, Jamar Chase, the best wide receiver in the league. Some may say, not me, but some may say that. I think Jamar Chase is an elite wide receiver. This just wasn't his day. The Browns play them hard. Has Joe Burrow beaten the Browns? I don't know. It was wild. 9 fantasy points from Mike Williams and Marquise Brown. You can really deal with. 9 points isn't the worst thing in the world. But Jamar Chase? Man, that sucks. And of course I have to mention T. Higgins, who gave you 0 points. Oh my God, that game was awful for the Cincinnati Bengals. Moving on to quarterback studs. At the top of the list, we have Tua Tagovailoa. Man, this dude went off this week. Tua had 466 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. 466 yards? Are you joking? That is wild. In a 4-point scoring touchdown league, Tua had 28 points. Not too bad. I'm really surprised to say this, but quarterback 2, Jones. Where did that come from? Playing against the Eagles. Good. He had 316 yards and 3 touchdowns with 1 interception. 49 QBR though. That's not good. But 3 touchdowns is 3 touchdowns. Quarterback 3, also surprising, Jordan Love. Apparently he can play football. All right. Your running backs were incredible, but you did your thing. 245 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That's pretty good. His running backs helped with that, but he had to get them the ball. Good game. I'm actually just surprised about all of these. In 4th place, Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson had 223 yards, 1 passing touchdown, and an interception. Those are his passing stats. Let's see how he did on the ground. 10 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. Now he did get banged up, but this is a part of his game. He's going to run the ball. He's just got to protect himself a little better. Let's keep with the surprises. Quarterback 5, Deshaun Watson. Wild. 154 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But again, the rushing is where it's at. 5 carries for 45 yards and 1 touchdown. That'll do it. In fantasy football, rushing goes a long way, especially in 4-point scoring touchdown leagues. And I'd also like to give an honorable mention to Justin Herbert. He had 21 fantasy points. And Patrick Mahomes, who also had 21 fantasy points. It's time for quarterback busts. Quarterbacks that just played absolutely garbage this week. And number 1 right now, Joe Burrow. What were you doing, bro? Is it the leg? Does the leg still hurt? You can tell us, man. Your leg hurts, right? Let's get into it. Joe Burrow threw the ball 31 times and had 14 completions. It's less than half. He threw for 82 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions for a QBR of 20.4. Those are awful numbers for anybody, let alone Joe Burrow, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Yikes. He got you 3 fantasy points. Dud number 2, Lamar Jackson. What was this game, Lamar? Hold on to the ball, bro. Lamar Jackson had 169 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, and an interception for a QBR of 13.7. My God. Well, maybe he did a little better on the ground. Let's check that out. Benefit of the doubt, you know? 6 carries for 38 yards, 0 touchdowns. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, sounds like 9 fantasy points to me. All right, it's getting late, so let's wrap around the rest of this. Running back studs. Number 1, Aaron Jones, 26.7 fantasy points, full point PPR. Austin Eckler, 26.4 fantasy points. Christian McCaffrey, 25.9. Tyler Algier, 24.4. And a man who is still playing football right now, 22.2 fantasy points. And an honorable mention outside the top 5. Travis Etienne with 21 fantasy points. Bijan Robinson with 20 fantasy points. And Roshan Johnson, who apparently did work. 6 receptions. And Kyron Williams, some nice waiver wire ads right there. Running back duds. Honorable mention to everybody that started Deion Jackson. I know that he was an ad this week. Number 1 on my list though, Najee Harris. This was just awful. 5 fantasy points. I know that he didn't come into this game expecting to have a good game because it was the 49ers and they're like one of the best defenses in the league, but still, 5? This game is still going on, so he could possibly score more points, but at the moment, Saquon Barkley. Oh man, this game is not going well for him. At the moment, he has 6 fantasy points. Yikes. Bust number 3, Dameon Pierce. He only had 7 fantasy points. Ugh, gross. Tied for 4th, we have Javonte Williams, which I told you he was going to bust, so hopefully you knew this was coming. Jamal Williams had 7 points. Tight end studs. Hunter Henry with 16.6 points. Hayden Hurst with 15.1. Both of those guys were on the waiver wire. TJ Hawkinson with 11.5. Darnold Parham Jr., 11. Also on the waiver wire, but nobody was picking him up. Tight end 5 at the moment, Evan Ingram with about 10 fantasy points. And that's as low as I'm going because anything lower than 9, don't care. Tight end bust, honorable mention, Isaiah Likely. This is honestly just a personal note because I added him and used him and I advised other people to add him and he did nothing for me or you. So sorry about that. 1 fantasy point isn't gonna get it done. Gerald Everett only had 4 fantasy points. That's bad in a high scoring game especially. David Njoku only had 4 fantasy points. Now here's a couple headliners. George Kittle had 5 fantasy points. Yikes. And Kyle Pitts only had 6 fantasy points. Ugh, that really hurt. This was a huge tight end bust. Dallas Goedert got you 0 points. Oh my gosh. I started him in a league and Thank God I had Tyreek Hill to save me. And I'll just go over kickers real quick because I just pulled it up. It's fine. Stud kickers. Nick Falk with 18 points. Jake Elliott with 18. Brett Meyer, 15. James Sanders, 14. Jake Moody, 14. The only bust I care about talking about is Justin Tucker only having 5, and that wasn't his fault. That was their fault. Some defenses with nuts. Dallas is still actually playing. So the studs, Dallas Cowboys really just took the cake. So if you were playing the Cowboys, I really feel bad for you. 36 fantasy points. Green Bay Packers, 15. Philadelphia Eagles, 13. San Francisco 49ers, 13. I was apparently playing them. Atlanta Falcons, 12. Some people played Seattle. Chargers got you -5. Dolphins got you -1. Chiefs got you 3. Steelers got you 3. So that's going to do it for my studs and duds. Click here if you want to hear me talk more about these games or if you need somebody off the waiver wire.